Intro to Messaging with SQL Server Notification Services. Alright, so we're going to look at a new technology here in SQL Server 2005, one that allows us to send notifications to users and applications when certain events occur within our data. Now, this is a very, very wide open platform. What I mean by that is it's very customizable. There's a lot we can do, and it's fairly painless to use. It takes a little bit of getting used to because there is a lot of components to it, but we're going to clear all of them up here and take a look at how to use notification services here. So let's jump right into our outline, get familiar with what we're going to be talking about. We're going to start off here with an introduction to SSNS, SQL Server Notification Services. Just get an overview here of all these different components, how they work. I'm also going to show you here the development process of developing a notification application. That's kind of what they're called, they're notification applications. And also not only the development process, but the configuration process. So we'll take a look at all that here in an introduction. We'll then move into some sample applications. Now, SQL Server Notification Services comes with, if you install them, some really nice sample applications here within SQL Server that you can download, or actually you can install right through SQL Server Setup. So I'm going to take you through two of these sample applications. We'll configure it, we'll kind of look at the development process of them, alter the configuration files, we'll set it up, put it inside of, create an instance as they call it, inside of SQL Server, and then we'll just take a look at the whole process, developing, configuring, and using two different types of notification services applications, and we'll kind of delve into them, and I'll show you why they're two different types, and both of them very, very useful. We'll then here at the end take a look at how to configure and use both of those applications. Again, pretty much just a huge walkthrough of two of these applications to see how the process works, and just to kind of showcase the power of SQL Server Notification Services and the usefulness. Alright, let's jump right into an introduction here and get familiar with SQL Server Notification Services. And again, Notification Services is just simply a platform that allows us to build what are called notification applications. These are applications that we can subscribe to, and we would set up criteria which would be considered events, and we can say whenever this event occurs, send us a message, or send us a notification. That's really all notifications are, just simply messages here that can be sent to us users or applications on a wide variety of different devices, cell phones, PDAs, and such, in a wide variety of different formats as well. Now, let me give you some real-world examples here of what notification services could be used for, and actually what it is used for today. Take a weather site. Take weather.com, for instance. Let's say I wanted to go to weather.com, and I wanted to sign up on their website by giving them an email address, and then I'd probably set certain criteria there, such as maybe a zip code or a city and state, and I want to subscribe to their service, so every morning at a specified interval, I would get an email or something delivered to my phone or my PDA that gave me the weather forecast for the day. So that's a perfect example of what notification services are used for, and I'm sure you can probably even do that on weather.com. Other examples would be stock market applications where you can subscribe to a symbol. If prices fluctuate on that stock, sends you a message. Now, both of those are actually two different types. Weather.com could be a scheduled notification event because it's going to send you at a specific time every morning, where a stop application could be real time. It could send you when that price fluctuates on a specific stock. Really, the list goes on and on. You could use it for absolutely anything out there. And the bottom line here, if you want to bring your data and your users closer together, then this is really the way to do it, because now we can send users friendly, personalized messages as the data changes. Not only users, but anyone that uses your database. Really, this is it's a value add to any application out there. It'll only make people happy. So good stuff. And in the IT industry, what we strive for these days is real time, or at least close to it. And this is pretty much as close as you can get to giving individuals, users, customers real-time access to information as it changes. Now, how do we manage this stuff, and how do we develop and configure it? Well, ironically here, there's really not a lot of interface work here within SQL Server. Very little. We were just basically going to use SQL Server to configure the instance, set it up, and that's it. Everything is controlled through the development process through XML files. And we're going to configure these XML files with all the data we need, and we're going to throw them into SQL Server and have it create an instance for us based on the data in these XML files. You can also use managed code. If you're a programmer, or you know a programmer, you're going to become a programmer, they're very simple class libraries to get the hang of to programmatically set up a notification services instance and all that. You actually do have to use managed code for the subscription side of things, which I'll talk about. And don't worry, though, it's not very hard to do it all. And there are other ways around it, which I'll show you. So basically, though, the main way to develop and configure these applications is through XML files and just setting specific properties within those XML files. And we'll take a big look at how to do all that. All right, let's take a bird's eye view here at the architecture of SQL Server Notification Services. First off, we have subscribers. Subscribers are you and me. They're the individuals that are going to create subscriptions to applications, notification applications, and receive messages. right? When these certain events occur. Subscribers are going to create subscriptions. Subscriptions are just requests for specific pieces of information. In our weather.com example there, it would be the weather forecast. So that would be a subscription. Also here we're going to define what device we want it to be sent to. Do we want it to be sent to our email, our cell phone, our PDA, so on and so forth. So that's kind of how a subscription works. Also here, events. What is an event? Well, an event is really anything that occurs. So in kind of in our world here, it would be a specific piece of data. It would be a set of data. It would be when data gets entered into the database, that would be considered an event. And we're the ones that are going to define what an event is when we set up SQL Server notification services and what pieces of data would be considered an event. So how this process works then, notification services, whenever data gets entered into a table, it would match up the event data with the subscription data. If they match, that would be kind of a chime for a notification. So notification services would do its thing, format the data specifically for the device for that subscription, and send it off to the user as a notification. And that's all notifications are, just messages that can be sent to users on a wide variety of different devices. Now, what are underneath the hood, some of the components of notification services here, we have an event provider. And event providers, this is kind of an engine that collects the data. It collects this event data, stores it within notification services so it can do this matching between subscriptions and events and then send off the notifications. The generator is the actual thing that checks these subscriptions, which are actually called event rules. So a generator will actually do all of the work of matching up events to subscriptions, otherwise known again as event rules, and then sending it off to the distributor. The distributor is the individual, or the engine here, that takes these notifications, takes the event, says, all right, this is ready for a notification. It creates the notification, formats the notification, and then sends it off to the individual. So again, this is kind of a bird's eye view of the architecture of SQL Server notification services. Let's jump in a little bit deeper here and look at the development process and define each one of these components here in a little more detail. Now, what the development process really consists of here is configuring two XML files. The first one is called the ADF, the Application Definition File, and this is going to hold everything relating to our application, so we need to configure this first. Then we set up and configure the Instance Configuration File, otherwise known as the ICF. So we configure both of these files, and this gives us enough information to create a notification services instance. Now, there's one more step in between the application definition file and the instance configuration file, and that is managing subscribers and subscriptions here, and we'll talk about that shortly. But again, the first step here is creating your application definition file, which is going to hold all the configuration information for our notification application. Yeah, say that 10 times fast. Really, the first thing that we need to do here is define the database that notification services is going to be hosted in, the actual application database and the instance database. Now, how this works is you don't actually need to define a brand new database. This can work in two ways, and it really depends on the requirements for your application. Number one, say that your database that holds all of this data that we're going to be working with, say it's not hosted in SQL Server, it's in Oracle, or it's in some other, it's in a flat file system, or some system that isn't SQL Server, but we want to use SQL Server notification services because it's a really cool technology and there's a lot we can do with it. Well, in that case, what we can do is, and we actually have an example on doing such thing, but basically what we would do here is we would let SQL Server manage the notification service databases. What it would do is it would create its own application database and its own instance database, and then from there it would manage all that. We wouldn't have to worry about it at all. In that scenario, in which we're going to do, we're going to generate these XML files from our other system and put them into a folder, in which case the event provider here will grab that data, bring it into notification services here inside of these, what are called classes, or really these are just tables, pop them into these tables, and then notification services runs from there. The other way we can do this, and this is how our other sample is going to work, is that we will define an application database. Take AdventureWorks, for instance. We're going to actually we're going to define in our second sample, we're going to say we want AdventureWorks to be the host. And what SQL Server will do, instead of creating two databases, it'll create instance tables and it'll create application tables and store all of them within the AdventureWorks database. So those are really your two options there, is letting SQL Server create two databases, one for the application, one for the instance, and manage them, or we can have it create a bunch of tables in an existing database. So those are your two options. Now, after we specify the database, we need to set up each specific area here, our events, our subscriptions, our notifications, event providers, and then a bunch of settings following that. The first thing we're going to define here is our event classes, and really what an event what this means, this is just a fancy term for the event table. SQL Server actually already creates all of these tables, an event table, a subscription table, notification table. It creates these within these databases. Really why they call them classes is because we're going to define our own extra columns that SQL Server is going to append to these tables. So we're going to define the event data, right? And really what that is it's just a table that stores the event data. So SQL Server then is going to append our custom fields on top of its system fields. And that's how it's going to manage all the event data then. Same thing with subscription classes. We're going to create our own custom subscription fields. And again, these are going to be the fields that users are subscribing to. So a user in the weather.com example, for instance, they want to type in their zip code or their city or their state, or all three. We need to support all those, so we'll probably define all three of those fields inside of our subscription class, and then SQL Server will again manage that subscription data for us. Also within the subscriptions class, we define our subscription rules, and it's really just a transact SQL query that matches event data to subscription data. Also, we're going to define our notification classes, and notification classes really is just the fields that we're going to be able to use within these messages, the dynamic data that's coming in. So in the weather scenario, again, notification fields could be the actual temperature, the conditions, the wind speed, all that kind of stuff. So it's the data that we're going to format and send within these notifications. After we specify that data storage, we can also optionally here specify content formatters. Do we just want to send the raw data over to these individuals, or do we want to make it look nice and pretty using an XSLT, which is the extensible style sheet and transformation language? We can apply XSLT templates to our data and then make it look like HTML, make it look like a web page, make it look really pretty and such. We can also configure our delivery protocols here within our notification classes, which we'll do. Some examples here would be there's a file delivery protocol if you want to just simply output this data to a file on a network share somewhere, or we're going to configure our SMTP protocol here so we can email individuals notifications. Also, you can set up SMS protocols, which is of course the short messaging system for sending information to PDAs and such. Next up here we have our event providers, and event providers are, again, this is the component that collects the actual data itself and puts it into our event tables so notification services can then match our events to our subscriptions. To give you some examples of event providers, the first sample that we're going to use is going to take advantage of what's called the File System Watcher event provider. And the File System Watcher is pretty cool. Basically, it just sits on top of a directory, monitors it. When any files come into this directory, it immediately picks them up, processes them, and puts them into the event tables. So that's pretty much what a File System Watcher does, and that's going to be our first example. Second, another very popular one is SQL Server as an event provider. What we would do is we would specify SQL Server as an event provider and set up triggers on our tables, and whenever data gets into these tables, the triggers would then just simply pop in the data into these event tables. So really, event provider, all it comes down to, it's the component that collects the raw data and sends it into our event tables. And then after this, really, those are really the main areas of setup here, setting up these four areas: event classes, subscription classes, notification classes, and event providers as far as the ADF goes. The other ones are just simply settings, generator settings. You can specify things like the thread pool size. Again, the generator is the one that is actually matching up these rules to these events and then sending off that, it's ready to send to the distributor, so the distributor can format this information and such and send it off using a delivery protocol to the users. So really just simple settings here in the generator. The distributor, same thing, simple settings. Application execution settings, really all these settings, the distributor and application execution relating to time intervals, and such as, if I go idle, how often do you want the distributor to check and send these things over? Really just all relating to time and intervals of sending, and also clearing out the data, because this event data is just going to pile up in here. So you can set application settings to clear out the event data on specific intervals and such. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the next thing we need to do is we need a way to manage subscribers and subscriptions. And really the preferred way to do this right now, and really the only way, is using what's called NMO. And this is Notification Management Objects. It's a class library that programmers can tap into using the .NET framework to really just programmatically work with subscribers and subscriptions. So you can create a web application or a Windows application to manage both of these areas of notification services. Now, another way to do this, and this is really only feasible if you have a very small amount of subscribers and subscriptions, you could actually edit the subscriber and subscription table manually. That is another option if you're not familiar with the programming language, but really, again, it's only feasible if you have small amounts of subscribers and subscriptions. Now, on a positive note, and another motivating note is it's actually very simple to use notification management objects. They're very easy class libraries, and they're not very big. And I'm actually going to show you in both of our examples how to do this. It's very simple to use these objects, just simply because there's not a lot to them. It's very simple to create a subscriber. All you really need is a name, a device name, and then either an email address or phone number or such. So not much information. Same with subscriptions. You don't really need a lot of information. You're just simply setting up the subscriber and then any data elements that are going to be the criteria when an event matches a subscription to send that subscriber information. So just wanted to mention that though. Also here, again, setting up the configuration process here is creating our ICF, our instance configuration file. This is going to come last after we have our application defined. First thing we're going to do is define the instance database. Again, I talked about that a little bit over here. Same thing with the application database. Same rules apply. The next thing we're going to do is associate our applications with an instance. And I say applications because you're not tied. This is not a one-to-one relationship here between the ADF and the ICF. You can actually associate many applications with one notification services instance. So kind of a nice thing that we can do there. Also, we're going to set up and define our delivery channels. And the delivery channel being, again, set up and define the file. If we're going to send it to a file, where is that file going to be? Also, if we're going to send it to, if we're going to enable SMTP relay, or in other words, we're going to enable email notifications, and we're going to need to define that we're going to use SMTP and define our SMTP email servers in here as well. Alright, so let's head on into some samples here and take a look at how two different types of notification applications work here. And one of them we're going to use, again, outside data source coming in as XML files. Another one we're going to use SQL Server for and use the AdventureWorks database for. Now, a lot of this work, setup and configuration work, has to be done on the SQL Server itself, mainly because SQL Server Notification Services creates services when we configure, and these services are going to be the ones that are constantly monitoring this data, and really it's where the generator sits and also the distributor. So let's head on over to the SQL Nugget machine here. I have an RDP session set up. We'll RDP on over to the SQL Nugget machine here. Here we are. And the first thing I want to show you here is how these samples work. So I'm going to go to my computer, into the C drive, into Program Files, into Microsoft SQL Server, into 90, version 9.0, and then into samples here. And again, if you install the samples that come with SQL Server 2005, this is what you'll get. You'll get all of these folders in here. We're going to go right into the Notification Services folder. The ones we're going to look at here are the flight sample and the inventory tracker sample. First up is the flight sample, and the flight sample it's really just like an airline industry, right? Where you want to sign up on an airline site and say, if this flight from this source to this destination happens at this price, or is under this price, then I want to be notified about it. So that's kind of the basis of this, and it's all going to work through XML files. XML files are going to be placed into this, uploaded into this events directory, and then from that point on, notification services will take this data, put it into its tables, and do its thing. Alright, so here's how this process is going to work. We're going to first take a look at the application definition file. We're then going to take a look at the event data here, how it's structured, the event schema, basically set up all of our classes there within that application definition file. And then we'll create our subscribers, create our subscriptions, and then we'll set it up inside of SQL Server. We'll configure the instance, and then we'll put this event data within our event folder, let notification services grab that data, format it, and do all it needs to do to send it off to the user. So this is actually the notifications folder is where the actual the file notifications are going to be sent to, and of course the email notifications will be sent to our email users. Now, Microsoft included this is again a nice Microsoft sample here. They actually have this sample in both VB and C#. I just took out all the C# stuff to clean it up here. But we're going to open up this Visual Studio solution because it actually has all this stuff in here formatted nicely, and we can kind of go through it all within the Visual Studio environment. It has a nice XML editor too, so we can take a look at how these XML files look and how the application definition file looks, and also the instance configuration file. Alright, here's how the application definition file looks. Let's open it up here. App.adf.xml. Here's how it looks. Basically here we have our root application node, and inside of it here is just basically the namespaces that we need to reference here, the standard XML schema namespace, the XML schema instance namespace, and at the end here this namespace actually references the application definition file schema. Of course, this entire file here has to also conform to the application definition file schema. Now, you can get simple templates actually come in SQL Server Management Studio. You can also get these templates out of Books Online. Very simple to just grab these templates and then edit these data fields. So the first thing we need to set up, as we mentioned before, is the event class. The first thing you give it is a name, and this is just going to be the name of the kind of the name of the table that it's going to create underneath the hood. It's going to append it to its own system name. And here are the fields that we're going to say are event data fields. Leaving from, again, departing from, you can take that as, going to, or arriving at, the carrier, the airline carrier, and then the price. And also here the conditions. So these are all the fields that we're going to trap for and consider event data. So basically, this will allow users to set up conditions on this specific data. Also, what you can do is you can put an index, because again, this is a table, and since we're going to be matching, our SQL Server notification services is going to be matching these events to these subscriptions, it only makes sense that we should index a specific field in here to make those, to speed up the whole process. So we put an index here on the leaving from and the going to fields within this class, within this table. The next thing we set up here is our subscription class. Again, same exact thing. We just set up all the fields that are going to get appended to the end of that table. This one's going to be called flight subscription. These are required. The device name and the subscriber locale we have to actually add on there. Those will get appended. And then look at that, the same fields here, the same fields that we're going to allow individuals to create subscriptions off of. The leaving from, the going to, the carrier, and the price field. All right, and also here you can set up an index, of course, because we're going to, again, be creating that query that matches events to subscriptions here. So because we're going to be doing that join, we can benefit from performance by putting in an index on these fields as well. Here's how it works then. We create a rule. And our rule here, our flight subscriptions event rule, this is the transact SQL query I was talking about earlier, where we're going to create the query that actually does the matches between the subscriptions and the events. And what we're going to do here, what this rule is doing, is it's inserting into our notification table that we're going to define next here. It's saying, basically, we're doing an insert into based on a select statement. So our select statement here just simply matches up. It's going to grab all these fields that you see defined above here, the subscriber ID. This is going to be the individual subscriber identification, which is probably going to be their name or something. The name, or the device name that we're sending it to, the locale, which is, of course, basically their location. So SQL Server notification services can format these messages in the appropriate language using the appropriate code page and such. And then all of the fields that we defined above. So we're just doing a select statement to grab all that data where the event table equals a subscription table, and the event table equals a subscription table for each field in here that we defined. And then also here I'll explain what this one means in a second. Basically means where the event carrier equals a subscription carrier, or the carrier is doesn't matter. Basically, it could be any carrier, and I'll explain again that one when we look up setting up our subscriptions. And then here also where the price is less than the subscription price. So when the event is less than the subscription price, that's what the AND-LT there stands for. And basically that's all we're doing. We're putting data into the notification table based on the results from our events matching up to our subscriptions. We also here specify our event class name within our subscription class, so we can so our subscription knows what table the event class is where this is coming from. Also down here, then, we set up our notification class. And again, same thing. We just set up all the fields that we can use within our messages and our notifications. We set up our content formatter. Again, our content formatter defines basically the content of the message. So in here, we're setting up an XSLT formatter here. As you can see, our XSLT formatter class name. We set up our directory where the XSLT exists, and then the actual file name itself. And you can see here is that XSLT. And this is a very simple XSLT that just simply creates a notification template and then takes those fields here. You can see it's going to say the carrier name. It's going to be in bold, nice, pretty bold letters. The carrier is now offering promotional fare tickets at the record price of, and then of course the price is going to be put in here, also in bold, so on and so forth. So it's just going to basically format a nice HTML message here with the body of it being, of course, our fields dynamically creating text within the message. So very, very simple XSLT. But basically that's all we're doing. We're just specifying to format that using the XSLT. Also digest delivery. This is kind of cool. Digest delivery basically means that if I have 3 notifications within one batch, and 3 notifications could come to me, rather than me getting 3 emails, notification services is smart enough to compile all 3 of those messages into one. So that's kind of a really cool thing, which I'll show you here in our more advanced sample. We'll take a look at how that works. Also here, the next thing you do is set up your protocols. You can see we're setting up a file protocol, defining our fields within that file, and then also our SMTP protocol, our mailing, in other words, where we set up the subject. And in the subject here, we're just going to put the flight notification and then the current date and time that this message was sent. the body format being HTML. From, we're going to say sender@adventureworks.com, put the priority, and then to is going to be that device address, the actual field from the device address. So this will turn out to be their phone number, or in this case, since it's an email, it'll be their email address. Also here we have the expiration age, and the expiration age this is kind of another cool little feature. Say that, for instance, our generator only kicks off every 3 hours, right? It only checks this every 3 hours because we're low on server resources. Well, what we can do here is put an expiration age on our notifications to say if this data is outdated after an hour or 2 hours, then don't send the notification at all. And that's what this is. It's just a goofy format. They have actually kind of a format that you can use to define this, and this just basically means 2 hours is when notifications expire. The next thing we need to set up is our providers. And you can have hosted providers, which means basically notification services is hosting the actual provider, or you can have custom providers where you write, using managed code, your own data provider that runs out and grabs all this data. But again, remember the event providers, these are the guys that are going to collect the data for us. So what we're doing here is let's go ahead and rename this to Flight File System Watcher. There we go. Because this is going to be the file system watcher component that's going to sit on top of the directory, monitor for data to get into the directory. As soon as it does, it's going to grab the data, pop it into our event tables. Also here we're using variables, and I'll show you how to use variables. Basically, you just define them with a start %, end %, and then what will happen here is when we configure it, using the instance configuration, SQL, when we set it up, will ask us to fill in these variables, and then it will use these variables in all these names. So system name, this is just basically going to be the actual SQL server, in this case, the actual system name. Also the watch directory, this is going to be the directory where, again, those files come into. The schema file directory is going to be the actual event schema here. And speaking of the event schema, here's what it looks like. Here's the event data that we're going to pop into that event directory, just leaving from the data, going to data, carrier data, price, data, and then the condition. So this is just the data that we're going to pop into that file. And the schema here just defines the structure of this. And I was speaking in previous videos that Visual Studio had a kind of an XSD schema designer. This is it. This is what it looks like here. Just like designing tables within a database designer, it's just simply all of your elements in here and their data types. Also here, the last two components that we really need to set up here are the generator, what server the generator is on, and the distributor, what server the distributor is running on. Everything else really is just application execution settings, time intervals, how long you want this data, the event data to stay in SQL Server, things like that. And also, anytime you see this kind of this PT, 15S here, this is just called a time span. It's just a format of a time span. So this, for instance, is 15 seconds. So you just have to format it the way the SQL Server wants it formatted here. So, and check out books online. They have what these formats mean. They're very easy to get the hang of. But this is basically how our application definition file looks. And this is really the bulk of the work here is setting up your application definition file. Let's go ahead and save this. The next thing we need to do after setting that up is creating subscribers. Now, we can't actually create the subscribers and subscriptions now because the notification services instance isn't up. But what we're going to do is we're going to create these applications, we're going to build them so we can just run them and configure our instance, get it up and running, create our subscribers, our subscriptions, and kind of do everything, configure and use it all in one shot. Now, how this works, again, these are command line applications, both of these. And first thing we're going to do is add subscribers here. And I'm not going to go through all this code, but there's not a lot to it, and there's not a lot of code here. So if you're familiar with the code, take a look at it. It's very simple to use. Basically here we're just creating a new subscriber object, and we're specifying the subscriber ID, the device name, so the type of device we're using here. In this case, we're just going to output it to a file. This is going to be the address. Here, let me show you tooltips here. There you go. So the ID is the Stephanie, in this case just her name, the device type name, so file or email or cell phone, whatever the case may be. And then the device address, in this case the file, we don't need an address because it's going to be a file placed on there. And then the actual delivery channel name. So we're going to change this. How about we change this to Garth file, me file. We'll change this one over here to Garth email. And this is going to be, again, the email device type. And then we're going to go ahead and put my email address in here. garth.sqladmin@gmail.com. There we go. And also, of course, we're using the email channel then. And we'll leave these other ones the way they are here. Also, a couple more file channels in there. But essentially, this is going to create a subscriber. So we're going to close out of this, and we're going to build this application here. So that's all ready to go whenever we want to create those subscribers. And then subscriptions are actually even easier than that. Basically, again, subscriptions are the criteria that we're going to use to subscribe to these events. And here's how it works. New subscription. This one, let's go ahead and put in Garth file. This one will be sent to a file when these conditions are true. And the conditions are departing from SEA, arriving at or going to CUN. The carrier doesn't matter. And this is where that splat came in, or the star here came in before. It just basically means that we don't care about the carrier. As long as it's leaving from here, going to here, and the price is this value or less. Remember our query, it was price is less than the subscription price, less than the event price, and we're going to say 800. Here, let's go ahead and say Garth email is a subscriber ID. Same thing, leaving from, going to, pretty much all the same parameters here. And that's it. So let's go ahead and save this one as well, and we'll compile it. Now the last development step we need to do here is configure our instance configuration file, which is right here. Let's open this guy up. Basically what we do here is we specify our instance name, just the name of the notification services instance, SQL Server system that it's running on, the actual SQL Server instance that is. Also then here, from here on out, all of our applications. So again, you can have multiple applications hosted within this instance. We just have one here, so we have our application, followed by the name of the application. We're going to call it flight. The base directory path, this is where the directory that the application definition file sits in here. So we specify our environment, or the parameter that's going to get passed in here when we specify when we create the instance, followed by the app definition folder, which is basically this folder right here. We're also going to here pass in the actual name of the application definition file. And then these are the parameters here that we can use and that we're going to fill in here. Really, it's just the SQL Server, the notification services host, so basically the SQL Server instance, the actual server that we're running on here, SQL Nugget, and then the sample directory, which is the base directory path, and then this event store will actually get built off of this sample directory and the events folder in there. So you set up your parameters and variables that you can use throughout these XML files, and then you set up your delivery channels. We want to set up a file channel here. The protocol is the file. Arguments here is the name of the file, so they're going to pop into a file called filenotifications.txt here within our notifications folder. That's what this guy is right here. And then we also set up our final delivery channel, which is the email channel, being the SMTP protocol. And since this is a sample here, they didn't add any of the arguments in here, so let's go ahead and add the arguments. There we go. And an argument. And this argument is actually going to be here. We're going to call this the SMTP server argument. And the value here is going to be bbnugget.cbtnuggets.com, our SMTP server. So that's all you're doing here is setting a property for the SMTP protocol. There's other arguments too that you can use, or other properties such as the encoding. You can put the encoding that you can use for your outgoing email messages and such. But that's pretty much it. So this is how we set up the instance configuration file. Not a lot to it, just setting up any parameters if you're going to use them, your instance, your SQL Server, and then of course any delivery channels that you're going to use. Alright, so now that we have everything ready to go here, let's go ahead and open up SQL Server Management Studio and create our notification services instance. So this fires up here. We're going to connect right directly to our production instance, get an Object Explorer reference to that. Head on down to Notification Services here, right-click on it, and choose New Notification Services Instance. Now the next thing we're going to do is to specify our configuration file. This is our instance configuration file, so we'll just click on Browse here, choose Instance Config, and hit Open. And here's our parameters right off the bat here. So let's go ahead and type in our parameters here. SQL Nugget / sql2005 prod. So this is going to be our actual SQL Server instance that Notification Services is hosted in. Next is the sample directory, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this up here. There's our sample directory right there. We'll paste it in there. Finally, our host is going to be our SQL Nugget machine. So we'll just type in SQL Nugget. And also we're going to choose to enable the instance after it is created so we can start using it right away. So that's what it's going to do here. It's first going to validate everything, make sure the XML is valid. Then it's going to create both the databases, the instance database, the application database, compile those SQL statements, execute them to create those databases. Again, remember, because we're not hosting this inside an existing database here, so SQL Server needs to create two databases, one for the instance, one for the actual notification services instance, and then one for the application, and one for actually each application if you had multiple ones. And there we go. So it's done doing all that and actually enabled it for us. Everything is successful. Now we have a flight instance. The next thing we need to do is create the Windows services. So if we right-click on the instance, go to Tasks, head down to Register here, and click on that. We're going to choose here to create the Windows service, and we need to go ahead and specify the account that the service is going to run under. So we're going to choose the administrator account here. There we go, and we'll also type in the password here. And that's that. So we're all set here. We can hit OK, and it's going to update the registry, install the Windows service, and then install the performance counters as well. If you need to do any monitoring on notification services, we have performance counters to do so. Once this is all set, which shouldn't take very long. Come on! But after this is done, basically what we need to do is just start it up. We start the service, which we can do here through SQL Server Management Studio. We start the server and we're ready to rock. Everything's running, our event provider is monitoring our directory, and we're pretty much ready to put data into that directory, and notifications will start flying out the door. So there we go. All set here, all set here. Our instance is up. All we need to do is start it. We'll say yes, and guess what? We're ready to go. So it's just basically starting the Windows service. Now we have a notification services instance up and running and aware. Now one final thing we need to do here is create our subscribers and our subscriptions. So let's go ahead and here jump into our add subscribers, into our VB, add subscribers, our bin directory here, and here's our exe. Let's just go ahead and run this. This will run, and there we go. It created my file subscriber and device information, email subscriber and device information, and a couple of other individuals there. We'll go ahead and exit that, and let's head into our subscription one now. Add subscriptions, VB, add subscriptions, bin, and here it is. So we'll click on this, double click it. There we go. We have our two subscriptions for the file version and the email version. We'll hit enter to exit there, and now we're truly ready to rock. So what we're going to do here is head back up into this directory, and we're going to create this event data. Let me just show you this event data one more time, what it looks like. I'll double click on it here. And you can see this is the event data, leaving from, going to, carrier, price, and conditions. This one will match our conditions for both our file and our email here, because we're leaving from and going to SEA, CUN, carrier doesn't matter, and the price was less than 800, so this will match. These two won't, because the carrier and the going to won't, but maybe it matches someone else's notification. So there's the event data. I'm going to go ahead and right-click and copy this file. We'll go into our event directory. We'll paste it in here, and watch this. As soon as our file system watcher, whatever interval it's on, a few seconds here, sees this file, it's going to grab it, take the data out of it, pop it over into there, and then rename the file, pop the data over into the event tables, and then rename the file as .done. There we go. So now it's processing this information. Our generator is doing its job, comparing the event data to the subscription data within our notification services database, which, if I show you here, if I expand databases, here it is. Look at this. Here's our NS main, so this is kind of our instance data. And if you look at the tables here, this is all the relating to the instance. So subscribers, subscriber locales, devices, protocols, things like that, delivery channels, database options, application name, all the stuff relating to the instance, where the actual application database is right here. And then all of our data for the application is going to get stored in here. So you have your distributor information, again, notifications, subscriptions, and events tables. Those are the main tables there that store all this data. So we have all this stuff set up. We have our file in there. Now these notifications should have been generated. So first off, let's take a look here at our notifications directory to see if our file, look at that, there's our file notification. And look at that, just all that text was placed in there in the file. Also, I have email set up. So let's go back over to our VB Nugget machine, and I'm just going to fire open Outlook Express here. I have it hooked up to that Gmail account that we created. I'll hit send receive. Look at that, we got an email. Let's check it out. Hey, there it is. And here it is. Here's what it looks like. Flight promotion. There's our MA is now offering at this price from Seattle to Cancun, and here's the conditions, so on and so forth. So we got our email sent to us. We got our file notification sent to us. Pretty cool stuff, and not too bad to use. Okay, the last thing I want to take us through here is another sample, and this sample is going to be a little more complex, but it's also a little more flexible. So let's head back over to SQL Nugget here, and let's get out of our flight application and head into our inventory tracker application. Now what this guy does, this is basically, it works on the AdventureWorks database, and it's based on quantities. Subscribers will create subscriptions that say, for this product at this location, if this quantity is this or that value, then we want to be notified of it. So the reason this is more flexible is because it uses what are called condition events or condition actions. And condition actions basically allow the user to define the where clause in our queries, where in our flight application we define the entire query, the where clause, and again we just matched up values to values. So it's a little static in that sense. This one is completely flexible, of course, because we're just going to define the select statement we allow our subscribers to really define the where clause, again, in what they're searching on. A couple other differences here. This application actually runs within SQL Server, within the AdventureWorks database. So we're going to specify to use the AdventureWorks database for notification services to store the application data and the actual instance data for the notification instance. And as well here, it's the event provider that we used is trigger-based. So data gets directly updated within the tables here within SQL Server in the AdventureWorks database. These triggers are going to take that data and pop it into the appropriate notification services tables, where notification services will then pick it up and do the comparisons between subscriptions and events, and then kick out those notifications if any are available to us. So I'm going to go through here and kind of take you through, again, the differences. Let's start off here with the application definition file. Well, I'm just going to open this right up here rather than going into Visual Studio. And here's how it works. Again, the difference here, the database name. We're specifying the AdventureWorks database. We're specifying the schema here as well to where all these objects, all these notification service objects are going to be related to. And then everything else is the same. We specify, again, our event classes here. We specify our subscription classes. The difference here, here's what is called our condition action here, where we're not really specifying a where clause. We're just saying put data into the notification table here based on the data that the trigger already inserted. So this is just simply a relay, really, where it's just popping that data into that table. And then everything else down here is pretty much the same. The XSLT formatter, we're using digest delivery, which you'll actually be able to see in this sample work. And pretty much everything else, SMTP is the same. And here's the other big difference here is we're using the SQL Trigger Event Provider, which is hosted by SQL, not by notification services. That's why it's called a non-hosted event provider as opposed to a hosted event provider. So that's our application definition file. Pretty much the same, except for we have a condition action, again, a little more flexible because users are going to define exactly what the where clause is going to be for their subscriptions. Now we also have a nice formatted XSLT transformation here that's going to take this data and make it look pretty for us, so we have that going for us. The next thing, again, subscribers and subscriptions. Subscribers the exact same as before. Subscriptions are different, as I mentioned here. Let me go ahead and open up our subscription solution here in Visual Studio just to kind of take you through and give you an idea of how this works and how users can build their own where clause. And here it is. I made a Garth email subscriber again for this instance. And here's how it works. You can see before we just had a bunch of static values in here. And we do here as well. We have static code values in here. But the point is you can do an AND condition or condition. And this is going to do an AND condition, basically saying the product name is going to equal this. And the location name is going to equal this, final assembly here. And the quantity here is going to be less than or equal to 35. So this is where you could wrap a pretty nifty WinForm or web form application together that can take and programmatically wrap around all these conditions. So users will be able to use an interface to say we want this product to be this, or the location to be this, and the value to be this. You can get all your ands and ors between your fields in there. And again, that's where the user is defining, again, their conditions. So that would require an interface, and that's probably why they made this programmatic, because you're going to need an interface if you want to give your subscribers the ability to flexibly choose fields and their values. So that's it. I already have all this stuff compiled here, so we'll just close right out of Visual Studio. And I already, again, have the subscribers and our subscription is compiled there, so those are ready to run when we set up our instance here. We also have our instance configuration file here, and this is going to be pretty much the exact same as our other instance configuration file. The only difference here is we're specifying a database name and a schema name to where all of these notification services instance tables and such are going to be stored within that AdventureWorks table. So database, excuse me. So now what we're going to do, we have everything set up. Let's set up our instance, and then what we need to do is we need to create that trigger, and also our subscribers and our subscriptions. And again here, since we're using a non-hosted event provider, we're basically telling notification services that we're the ones that are going to handle the process of taking the data from its source and putting it into these event tables in the notification services instance. So we'll do that, then we'll set up our subscribers, and we'll be ready to rock and roll here. So let's head back into SQL Server Management Studio. Let's right-click on our notification services node, choose New Notification Services Instance. Let's go ahead and hit Browse here to browse to our instance configuration file, which is going to be in our inventory tracker database or folder here. There it is. We'll click on Open. And now we just need to specify some parameters here. This is going to be our SQL Nugget, SQL 2005 production database. That's the SQL server here that's going to host our data. Our sample directory, let's go ahead and put that in here. We'll just cheat here and copy all the everything that we browsed from to get our instance configuration file. And then, of course, SQL Nugget's going to be our host again, the host of the actual service. We'll enable this, hit OK, and it's going to get everything going for us. Just as before, create our database infrastructures, create those statements, compile them, and then execute them, and then of course, at the very end here, enable our notification services instance. So we'll just give this a second to do its thing. There it is. Close, close. Here we go. We have our instance. Now the next thing again we need to do is create our service. So we'll go here, right click on our instance, head into tasks, and choose register. We want to go ahead here and create the Windows service. Let's go ahead and run it under the administrator account here. We'll give it the password and hit OK. So we'll do the same thing. Create those registry entries, install the Windows service, install our performance counters, and we're up and running. The only thing we need to do now is actually start the instance, install our triggers, create our subscribers, create their subscriptions, and then just update some data within our inventory, and then we'll see the notifications flow. There we are. All right, so let's hit close here, hit OK there, and we're all set. So now what we need to do is actually take our SQL scripts here and create our triggers. So let's go back into SQL Server Management Studio. I'll go to File, Open File. We're going to open up our Setup Inventory Tracker sample. This is just simply going to create the trigger here. So we're going to connect to our production instance here, get into AdventureWorks, and hit Execute. So, and there we go. So now we have a trigger on our inventory table. So if any inventory gets updated, it's going to make that event data and toss it in to our event tables, so notification services can then compare our subscriptions to our events, and of course then send out notifications if anything matches up. So let's head back down here to create some subscribers. We'll go into our Add Subscribers folder here, and we'll run inside of our bin directory, gbug. Here you go. And again, I just made one this time, just the Garth email subscriber. That points to that email address. So we've got our subscribers set up. Now let's create some subscriptions here. There we go. Bin, debug, and let's add some subscriptions for our subscribers. There we go. All set. So we'll hit enter here. Our subscriptions are added. Our subscribers are added. The next thing we need to do is go back into SQL Server Management Studio, and let's open up another script here. This script is actually going to go ahead and just update the product inventory. So just a little simple script here that is going to use AdventureWorks and just simply update those inventories. And this will, of course, these match the product that we specified in our subscriptions, and the product ID and the location and also the quantity here. So if we run these, actually the next thing we need to do, we didn't actually enable, start our service here. So we got to right click on our instance and start. There we go. Now we're started. Now it's starting the service. If we actually did this before, if we ran the script before we started, nothing would have happened. We wouldn't get any updates. But we remembered to start it. Let's go ahead and execute our code here. Look at that. It actually popped all that. This is the trigger coming back here with all of this information, basically saying that it updated, it inserted this data into our event tables. And there you go. That's why you get all these one rows affected. It created a bunch of event data for us. All right, let's head back over to our VB Nugget machine here and take a look to see if we got that notification. So over here on VB Nugget, let's go down to the Start button, up to Programs, over to Outlook Express, and fire this guy up. And it looks like we're receiving mail here. We sure are. And check it out. There it is. And you can see nice format here in a nice little table manner that we get our product and the current quantity. And this actually updated it twice just to show you digest delivery here. It would have had two separate notifications with the same data, but rather than that, it just wrapped it in to one notification in one table. So that's kind of how digest delivery works there. And that's it. So we got our notification from our inventory tracker, from our flight application. Notification services is pretty cool stuff. Now, a couple of small things I want to show you here back over on SQL Nugget. The databases, and again, remember before, our flight application used its own two databases, one for the flight application itself and all the flight data, subscription data, event data, notification data and such, and then our actual instance data that holds all the configuration information for the actual notification services instance. This time we told it to store it in AdventureWorks. And look at this, if we expand AdventureWorks, expand tables here, scroll down, look at this, here's our schema here, our tracker application schema that holds all the tables associated with the application. And then down a little further, you have your instance schema that holds all the tables relating to the instance. Just so it goes to show here that you can store, you can store both instance and application data in one database rather than have it split out across separate databases. All right, so in the CBT Nugget, we took a big look here at an introduction to SQL Server notification services, and And really what I wanted to do with this video is just introduce you to the technology and take a big look at all the different things we can do with it. And so we started off here with just that, an introduction, got familiar with kind of an overview of what notification services are, the architecture, and then I also got you familiar with the development process, all the different components that we need to configure within notification services to get it up and running. Specifically here, configuring the ADF, the application definition file, configuring, creating subscribers and subscriptions, and then also creating an instance and configuring an instance configuration file. Once we get all that development process and configuration process down, we actually create the notification services instance, configure it, get it up and running with the Windows services, and then it's just all about watching the data flow and notifications getting sent to your subscribers. We took really a big look at two different types of samples. The first one being the flight sample, which ran off of a hosted event provider, which was actually called the file system watcher, where we just put data into a directory, SQL Server, and the event provider took that data, popped it into the event tables, matched up subscriptions to events, and fired off notifications. And at the end here, I kind of showed you a bigger sample that used a trigger and also a SQL Server to take this data and put it into its tables and then do the same process all over again. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.